Hello, my name is Randy Vanderhoof, and I'm the Executive Director of the Secure Technology Alliance, formerly known as the Smart Card Alliance. I want to let you know that today's webinar is being recorded, and it will be available for playback along with the presentation deck after the webinar has concluded. Also, we hope to have time to take questions at the end of today's webinar, and so we encourage listeners to submit their questions using their user dashboard on your screen. I'll return at the end of the presentation to lead the Q&A effort, and I encourage you to submit your questions while the presentations are being heard rather than waiting till the very end. That gives us a little bit more time to organize them and get to more questions than we would normally do. So we'll start with the next slide, please. So let me introduce the other presenters for today's webinar. Tom Lockwood is representing NextgenID, and Tom is a Secure Technology Alliance board member and a member of the executive committee, and is leading the mobile ID landscape assessment effort. Tom has extensive national defense, public safety, and private sector experience. Geoff Slagle serves as the director for the American Association of Motor Vehicle Administrators, or AAMVA, and is an accomplished identification security standards developer, having played instrumental roles in both national and international standards activities for over 20 years. David Kelts is director and architect for digital identity at IDEMIA, and he is an identity thought leader and a visionary bring your own identity technology expert. And Suraj Sudhakaran is a solutions architect for digital identity for Americas at Gemalto, and currently managing the digital identity program for the Americas, including driver's licenses, smart documents, and e-governance. And he has over 17 years of experience in the digital security realm. And lastly, David Coley represents Intercede, and David has over 20 years of experience supporting U.S. government technical solutions in mobility and security, and currently serves as a senior solution architect for Intercede with a focus on strong identity for mobile opportunities. So next slide, please. So for those of you who are not familiar with the Secure Technology Alliance, here's a brief overview. So the Secure Technology Alliance is a not-for-profit multi-industry association working to stimulate the understanding, adoption, and widespread application of secure solutions. And we provide, in a collaborative, member-driven environment, education and information on how smart cards and embedded chip technology and related hardware and software can be adopted across all markets in the United States. Can we advance to the next slide, please? So that's a pretty broad mission. And on the right side of your screen, you can see that the principal markets that we are focused on these activities towards includes access control, authentication, healthcare, identity management, the Internet of Things, mobile, payments, and transportation. And so as a cross-industry member-supported organization, we do the following things to educate and stimulate the market by bringing together stakeholders to effectively collaborate on promoting secure solutions, technology, and addressing industry challenges. We publish white papers, webinars, workshops, newsletters, and provide additional web content. We create conferences and events that focus on these specific markets and technology. We provide educational programs, training, and industry certifications to promote the experts in our field. We provide networking opportunities for professionals to share ideas and knowledge. And we produce strong industry communications through our public relations, web resources, and social media activities. Next slide. So shining the spotlight more on the Identity Council, it has a specific focus, which serves as a focal point for the Alliance's identity and identity-related efforts, leveraging embedded chip technology and privacy and security-enhancing software. And it supports a spectrum of both physical and logical access use cases, form factors, attributes, and authentication and authorization methods. Today's topic around mobile identity fits very well in this overall scheme of leveraging embedded chip technology for privacy and security enhancing software. So on the right side, you see some of the resources that have been published in recent years by the Identity Council, and they include white papers on topics such as assurance levels, on the FICAM architecture and understanding how that's applied in the federal government, identifiers and authentication, the choice to protect digital identity, identity management in healthcare, identity management systems, smart cards and privacy, interoperable identity credentials for the air transport industry, and smart card technology and its relation to the FIDO protocols. So these are some of the resources that are available, and we welcome you to visit those sites and review some of the other interesting materials that we've developed on the topic of identity and identity management. If you could turn to the next slide, please. So now I'd like to turn the presentation over to Tom Lockwood, who's going to provide us with an overview of the problem and the value outcome that we hope to achieve. So Tom?
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. We appreciate your time and attention on this. It is an important area for our community. How we think about identity is rapidly changing, and it's evolving. It's evolving from a product focus, an individual document, an individual standalone vertical market piece, to much more of a horizontal. We're moving from that paper and card-based media approach to other venues. One of those, the principal among those, are mobile devices. So it's critical as we start moving into the world in the time of the Secure Technology Alliance, really to look at and embrace mobile devices. The approach that we've taken when we look at this problem is it's the wild, wild west. So no one organization is going to solve the problem. And our approach in walking forward onto this is, how do we partner with other organizations? What we believe when we're done with this is the outcome value for everyone is an enhanced user experience. What we want to be able to do is, in this process, identify and capture some of the best practices. We want to be inclusive across this, across use cases, across market segments. What we'd like to be able to do is help stabilize and expand market direction and opportunities. And again, part of this is to create opportunities for integrators, for service providers across use cases, and again, improve overall interoperability and integration. And again, as we walk through, if there's opportunities to raise awareness and recommendations for standards and open standards, we would like to be able to do that. Next slide, please. So our target audience is, again, not only the membership that we normally deal with within something like the Identity Council, but across all of the various councils and other stakeholding organizations, other equal partners such as AAMVA, IBIA, AAAE. Again, as we're reaching out to folks, there's no one organization that has it all. So again, part of our challenge is to look at key use cases, let communities to identify what their priority use cases are, and create a forum that we can collaborate and discuss some key issues as we walk through. Again, we're going to, in the process, try to keep a very broad overview of mobile identity credentials. We would like to identify areas of convergence and consistency. We'd like to understand inconsistency in approach, conflicts, gaps. Again, different hardware approaches or software architectures as we're walking through. But again, what we would like to capture is some of the best methodologies. In the end, we believe we can provide educational resources and awareness like today. Anyone who is using a driver's license today really should, understand the direction that AAMVA is going. As people are looking at mobile devices, if you're in the federal market, again, as we start thinking about derived credentials, these two platforms are going to be, again, where we're looking for in the future, possibly even for primary credentials versus the whole concept of a derived credential. So again, next slide. Our approach was inclusive. We had a general call looking for collaboration with groups. We were looking for community leaders and community identified use cases. As we look through those, some of the key use cases included physical and logical access. Working with the Access Control Council, we looked at the transportation use cases. Again, those members include 10 of the largest regional transportation authorities in the US. We partnered with AAAE for the airport use cases, the mobile identity credentials that you're going to hear from David Coley and driver's license from the team working with AAMVA, healthcare, banking and retail, and colleges and universities. So those were the initial use cases that came to the top. Our process is going to be looking at the security elements, human factors, privacy, technology, architecture, and policy issues. Again, we're trying to keep it at a very high level. And then if there's continued support for additional use cases or to go at another level deeper, then that will happen after this phase is done. So again, the goal for this call is to provide an overall an assessment, an overview of where we're going. We would like to get your feedback and reaction to the approach. If there's key issues that come up today, following the presentation, when you have the links and the feedback opportunities, please give us your thoughts. Please give us your feedback. Again, if there's thoughts on how you would like to collaborate, that would be wonderful. We would encourage you to do so. There might be key issues that people would like to talk to some of the use case leaders themselves, and we'd be happy to facilitate those discussions. So with this, I thank you all very much for your time, and I'd like to go straight into one of the key use cases, and the leader of this is AAMVA. So with this, I'd like to transfer over to Geoff.
Thank you. And if you can go to the next slide, please. I'd like to start by expressing my gratitude to the Secure Technology Alliance for the opportunity to share some of the exciting progress that is being made in the area of mobile driver licenses. My thanks to Randy for his steady hand on the wheel of the work that the Alliance encompasses, and to my good friend and colleague Tom for the great job being done by the Council on Mobile Identity. By way of background, for those that don't know what AAMVA is, we are a trade association that represents the motor vehicle authorities and state and provincial law enforcement agencies in the U.S. and Canada. We work very closely with the U.S. federal government on a number of fronts, but primarily those that relate to highway safety and secure identities. We also have over 100 associate members, principally from industry, and I'm pleased and proud that 2 of them are joining us today. Next slide. A common question that continues to come up is what exactly is an MDL, and what are the differences between MDLs and traditional physical driver licenses? Like traditional card-type credentials, MDLs convey your identity. They include biographical details associated with your identity that have been vetted and come from a reliable source. The MDL is a secure credential that has protection against manipulation and unauthorized changes. And last, and maybe most importantly, the MDL provides for a significant leap in protecting the credential holder's privacy by putting control over the selective release of the information associated with the MDL. Next slide, please. AAMVA has organized its efforts through a joint working group made up of jurisdictional members that serve on the association's Card Design Standard Committee and their Electronic Identity Working Group. They were the ones that came up with the functional requirements for the MDL. These are commonly referred to as the what. And then the joint working group has been working within the standards community to address the how. This will be covered in greater detail by my colleagues David and Suraj. The first point we typically make when talking about the MDL is to clarify that the MDL is not simply an image of a driver license or identification card. While there is a visual interface for the entity depending on the MDL, the mechanics of how information is being shared, authenticated, and leveraged all lean into tried and tested cryptographic techniques and standards. The potential also exists for a bona fide biometric authentication between the holder and the MDL so that relying parties can have significantly higher confidence that the individual is in fact bound to the information that they're using. Another important point to make is that the initial implementation of MDLs will be done as a supplement to the physical cards and not initially as an option in lieu of. We do predict that the MDL solutions will continue to evolve, and while the standards help to establish a baseline for functionality, the potential for innovation is wide open to the vendors. And with that, I'd like to turn things over to David Kelts from IDEMIA. David?
Thank you, Geoff. So I wanted to, if you can skip to the next slide, please. I wanted to, Geoff mentioned innovation, and I think there's innovation in the MDL itself, and there's innovation that can happen in the marketplace and at the point of service. In order for that innovation to take part, I think we have to break down and look at what trust is and how we can bring about trust in the platform and trust in the MDLs in order to sort of spur that innovation. So from each party's perspective, there are different factors that are going to contribute to that trust. So on the left, from what we'd call a relying party side, from the party that's depending on the data and the user authentication of the MDL, from their point of view, they need it to be accurate. They need to know that when I accept this driver's license, I'm accepting it from the person to whom it's intended to be held by. And they need it to be secure and really reliable, 100% available. They need the systems to be highly available and so that they can depend on it. So trust there is about accuracy and being able to depend on it and ensuring that their data about those customers doesn't leak out and is not propagated through the system. So from the citizen's point of view, from the MDL holder's point of view, the user's point of view, their primary concerns are really going to be about the protection of their privacy. As I use this, is my privacy protected? Do I have the control that Geoff mentioned? Do I have control over my identity when I use this? And then the other factors are equally important. Is it accepted everywhere, which is a lot of where standardization comes into play? And is it convenient to use, which is a lot of where the innovation that Geoff talked about would come from. Providers of the technology making it convenient to use. There's a lot that goes into how we use physical cards from our pockets today. And we trust a lot of those things. There's trust in the process that creates it, in the card itself. We all know what we went through to get it, the proofing events, and trust in the security features on the card. So there's a lot that's built into the trust in the physical cards, and the ways, if you can go to the next slide, the ways that we can, as technology providers and an ecosystem and as alliances, that we can work to provide the trust is to sort of break that down into pieces. And I'm looking at the sort of building blocks of how trust can be built. There has to be a framework in which all of the parties in the system can operate, and that really covers the legal and compliance legislative obligations. So that framework is very important to be put together. Then we must be accurately provisioning the MDL to the proper holder. That's a really key part of this because we know and accept the processes of the physical cards today, and we must look at the accurate provisioning and we must trust those as we go forward. Then we need to make it really simple to integrate and accept. This is part of building that accepted everywhere and provide really diverse methods of interaction. So multiple ways in which the user can use their mobile driver's license and in order to fulfill a use case and fulfill multiple use cases, and these spread across lots of different contexts, including in-person contexts and really all the way up. Suraj will talk a little bit about some of the online contexts. And of course, that really key piece, consumers are not going to use it unless they know that their privacy is protected. We put a very connected version of a very disconnected thing in their hands. They have to be able to manage it and they have to feel their privacy is protected. So I think we turn over to Suraj at this point, who's going to talk some about the use cases, and then I'll come back and talk about some of the breakdowns of trust. Go ahead, Suraj.
Thank you, David. Now that we have seen what is an MDL, let us go over some of the use cases of MDL. Next slide, please. So the traditional use cases. It is given that the MDL should support the existing use cases of regular DLs. Being digital and being electronically verifiable, the current usages can be enhanced using an MDL, both for the MDL holder and the verifier. The traditional use cases for MDL mainly involves identity verification and proof of age verification. Some of the identity verification use cases are when a law enforcement officer is requesting for your DL to confirm identity and driving privileges, or when you're at an airport security point, the checkpoint, the TSA agent is requesting for your DL to confirm identity. Or it could even be service providers like banks and MNOs where you're trying to establish a relationship and they want to see your identity and you're providing the identity document. Then there is proof of age verification. So here, this is more of when you're trying to consume age-restricted products and you need to prove that you're above 18 or above 21. For instance, when you're purchasing alcohol, cigarettes, or lottery. Or it could even be when you're accessing age-restricted venues like casinos or clubs and you need to show that you are above 21. By transforming the traditional DL to a digital format on a mobile device, there are certain advantages towards establishing trust and data minimization. Rather than relying on the knowledge of security features of 400 plus DL and ID documents in circulation, the verifiers can now place their trust in digital authentication. You rely on established mathematical proofs rather than assertions based on physical evidence. For verifiers, the convenience brought forward in establishing this trust is a big leap. There are advantages to the credential owners as well. The users are in control of their credential and they get to choose what attribute they want to share based on the transaction type. With respect to privacy and data minimization, MDL goes far beyond than what is possible with traditional DLs. No more sharing your home address or even date of birth to a random store owner other than proving that you're eligible for that particular transaction. Let's move on to the next slide, please. E-services. So as described in the AAMVA functional specification, being a digital credential, there are many more usages that we can envision. DL is an identity vetted and proved by the state authority to ensure a very high level of assurance in using them for transactions. With an MDL, the credentials are made available in a digital medium, making it convenient for online transactions in the cyberspace. Federal and state agencies can make use of MDL credential as an authenticator and attribute provider for e-government services. For instance, the DMVs could utilize MDL to identify and authorize a requester before granting access to services like renewing DL or requesting driver's record. Service providers could use MDL to provide trusted attributes for electronic transactions. For instance, you're trying to change your address in a bank. So instead of giving the physical copy of the driver's license, provide your attribute using the MDL. And going beyond, we could even have proof of transactions made possible using digital signatures with an MDL. Let's move on to the next slide, please. Going beyond, the mobile driver's license can be envisioned as a digital identity platform. In an increasingly connected and digital world, a digital identity platform can provide identity assurance and attribute assertions for governmental and private agencies. It can evolve into a platform addressing the identity needs on the whole digital spectrum mobile devices, wearables, connected devices, mobile payment, cloud services, to name a few. It could also be seen as a customer engagement platform, bringing the government services closer and easily available to the people in need. Establishing the digital identity platform and continuously evolving it, we could imagine a whole new ecosystem of players connected to it, bringing valuable services to the right people with the right level of trust, thanks to the identity assurance provided by NDL. I'll hand over to David, who will talk about some of the challenges of NDL.
Excellent, thanks, Suraj. So looking at the different use cases and the expanded sets of use cases that are possible with this digital connected driver's license. The question then comes back to how do we sort of meet the challenges that provide trust in the platform, in the ecosystem, in the mobile driver's license itself. So we can skip to the next slide, please. We live in a mobile, global world, and people travel consistently. So the context in which we currently use the driver's license that's in our pocket is pretty well established and well known, as I said before. And there's a lot of trust built up that, and there's a lot of agreements that have been built up about the use of that. And that has happened regionally as well around the world. And there is a model where the frameworks in which we use identity can sort of align together. And standardization, especially global standardization, is something that can start to drive usage of mobile identities really across all the places where people travel today. So I think as we start, we'll start on regional levels, and the usage will be regional as the physical cards are now, but there is a platform for where we can align to global usage of mobile identities. We can skip to the next, please. So with a framework sort of established and frameworks being established for us to operate in, then we get to sort of that second challenge of making sure that we provision our identities to the right person for them to manage. And DMVs aren't really, they don't want to increase the burden, nor do consumers want to have to go back to the DMV. So they don't want to increase their in-person burden. We have to do things that are more accurate than what we're doing with identities on the internet today, where possession of an email address is sufficient to get yourself an identity. Since these are really tied to the legal person, we have to be a lot more accurate than those. We have to develop ways in which provisioning can be done accurately and done really sort of on demand as mobile users expect. They expect to be, download an app and run. So developing out that accurate provisioning is, and knowing that it was provisioned accurately is really critical for establishing the baseline of trust usage. And what we're doing in that provisioning is to place a citizen-managed identity into the hands of the consumers. Now, they have to have, as Geoff had said before, and Suraj, the complete control over what if their data leaves the device, what if their data gets used in the system, what data they share with the relying parties that they're going to do business with. And this citizen-managed identity is kind of the key piece to the privacy component and protecting sort of that fifth challenge of privacy. All right, go ahead to the next slide, please. So now let's look at some of the other challenges of simplifying the integration for relying parties. So now, once this driver's license is on the consumer's phones, they have to be able to utilize it. These sort of tap and go transmission use cases, or the ability to tap and have the verifier system, the relying party system, go and request data from the user, request data from the issuing authority that the user allows the release of. These are multiple different models that that we've looked at, and in the work that's being done in a couple of different key groups here. So the ISO, what is known as Working Group 10, the standard is 18013, 18013. We're starting to support these sort of diverse methods, starting with the transmission and working to other ones, but support the diverse methods in which a user can present their driver's license to a relying party and then have it be used. And the standards are what are going to make this really simple. Standards in the interactions, standards in the data models, standards in the ways that it can be used really across the globe and in lots of different contexts. As well, open source tools for easy integration are a key part of this, and the ability to unlock distance usage and really perhaps even unattended usage. So where the system, the mobile driver's license itself can challenge the user, the relying party can challenge it, and user authentication that we see in the online space is used to perform then unattended use cases. So we'll start to expand the scope of what can happen, and what can be done in an innovative fashion with the standards for transmission, adoption, lookup, and user authentication. And then just the user being able to share their information as they choose, as we do today with the physical card. So use cases such as signing, applying for a mortgage. These are the things that will unlock being able to use identity everywhere, which unlocks, sort of that key pillar for the users and in how they'll trust the system in addition to privacy. Okay, go ahead to the next one, please.
If you can go ahead to one more slide. Thank you. So to summarize, based on the requirements and the feedback received over the past few years, the MDL work will continue to reflect an approach that allows for the holder to decide how much detail they release and to who. Privacy and security have been baked in from the very beginning, and the work reflects this in its design. While there have been an initial focus on the specific driver privilege, the work truly provides a foundation for a much broader impact, as David and Suraj have described, that touches every aspect of the ongoing and emerging identity ecosystem. Because of the strong in-person proofing that the initial issuance is predicated on with regards to MDL, we believe that the MDL can deliver a value that's not seen to date compared to other more common forms of electronic identification. I'd like to close, if I can, with a baseball metaphor. Maintaining a solid handle on the issuance and the management of the MDL will be critical, and the absolute key to success with the MDL work will be the standards. However, MDLs that are not accepted outside the boundaries of the jurisdictions that issued them are going to be a swing and a miss. The great work that's being done by industry partners like those supporting the work that David and Suraj were referencing in ISO SC17WG10, that work is being teed up for what I believe to be an out-of-the-park home run. So appreciate the opportunity to visit on these things. And now I'd like to shift gears to another topic, derived PIV credentials, and turn things over to David Coley.
Great. Thank you so much, and good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining. Today, I'm going to be talking a little bit about derived personal identity verification credentials. In other words, strong identity credentials issued to mobile devices for use by federal government employees and contractors. If we can advance the next slide, please. So before I spend too much time on the derived PIV, it's probably important to just set the stage and make sure we have a clear understanding on the personal identity verification standard itself, or the original PIV, which really serves as a foundation for the issuance and usage of derived PIV credentials. So the personal identity verification standard, it's actually outlined in Federal Information Processing Standards number 201, provides a strong foundation for traditional desktop environments. This standard came about really when the need arose to have standard identity proofing processes across the U.S. government instead of the independent processes that were used by different departments and agencies. And so FIPS 201 really filled the role to standardize this process across government, and it provided a smart card that could be used for both physical access and logical access on computing environments. Again, it worked very well for traditional desktop environments, but when it comes to mobile, and as we've found, a number of other use cases, it doesn't necessarily translate all that well. So from this, really, it became obvious a new standard was needed, and that became Derived PIV, which was actually established in 2014. Next slide, please. So the Derived PIV credential itself, I mentioned a new standard was necessary. That standard is the special publication 800-157 put out by National Institutes of Standards and Technology. This standard builds significantly on FIPS 201 and in fact provides a framework to issue strong identity credentials for computing environments where traditional PIV cards or smart cards do not work well. Notably, primarily this is tablets and mobile phones, but what we've come to find out over the years since 800-157 was released, it also includes things like clean rooms, biohazard environments, and certain users with disabilities. Across government, there's a number of folks who have difficulty manipulating smart cards, and for those individuals, a derived credential often works much better. So I say derived, and I've got it in quotes here, and I'll touch on that a little bit because I want to make sure that it's real clear what derived means. The focus of 800-157 is very much around the issuance and lifecycle management processes. By that, what I mean is it's really very much focused on leveraging the existing proofing that's already been done in order for an employee or contractor to have a PIV, not requiring the user to go through the same proofing all over again just to get a mobile credential, but instead issue that mobile credential based off the fact that somebody has a PIV and then maintain the ongoing linkage between the PIV and that derived credential. So it's important also to stress here, there is no mathematical relationship between the PIV and the derived PIV credential. Often in cryptography, you will hear people talk about derived keys that are very much mathematically related, but in this case, the relationship really is an administrative relationship between the underlying PIV on which the new derived mobile credential or derived PIV is based. Next slide, please. So just want to touch really quickly on the value proposition here for the government. It should be obvious by now, certainly is for me. The federal government is going mobile. Actually, federal, state, local, all governments are really going mobile. But at a federal level, this really includes all aspects of the government. So it's civilian, it's also military, and it's very much the intelligence communities as well. And in fact, they've been going mobile for more than 2 decades now. At a high level, it's probably obvious to most on the phone. You know, the benefits here are increased ability to carry out government mission and oftentimes reduced costs as well. So doing more in support of government mission and making better use of taxpayer dollars. What's also apparent and been happening here is there's been a lot of new business applications that are being deployed. So historically, email, calendar, and contacts were really the killer application, if you will. And in a lot of cases, they continue to be so. However, it's these new business-driven applications, line of business apps, focused specifically on workforce and getting them away from their desks, getting them out in the field. These types of applications are being deployed to make much bigger impact, again, in support of government mission. So that's the high-level value prop for mobile. When we talk about derived PIV credentials, this really helps to further government desire to be more mobile. And it does so in a number of ways. The most obvious here is really the elimination of a smart card reader. the attachments that are used, whether they're physically slid onto a phone or a tablet, or whether they're a wireless reader, either way, they tend to add substantial cost to the deployment of a mobile solution. They also severely impact really the usability. You have something that adds substantial bulk or that must be kept charged and kept track of, making mobile that much harder to use when you're out in the field. And so a derived credential that does not require a smart card reader really helps provide a great way to leverage the strongly identity-proofed credential of a PIV, but now have something that supports strong authentication, document and data signing, and data encryption and decryption on the phone and tablets themselves. Next slide, please. So when it comes to implementation, really deployment of a derived PIV solution is really driven through a derived PIV system. This is a credential management system that can issue these credentials and keep track of them. But specifically what it does is it has a number of different functions to both check and ensure that the user is entitled to a derived PIV credential, but then also maintain that ongoing administrative linkage. Traditionally, when somebody is looking to get a mobile derived credential, they'll actually use a kiosk or some sort of self-service portal where they'll actually insert their PIV card into the system. And the very first thing that the system will do is check and validate the PIV card and its expiration, making sure that it's valid, making sure it came from a legitimate certification authority, and that the expiration dates on both the card and the certificates are current and valid. And then also seek to ensure that the user is entitled to have a card to begin, a derived PIV to begin with. Part of the way it does that is by requiring the user to actually show possession and control. Now, they've shown possession by sliding the card into a reader, but then it will also prompt the user to type in the PIN that's associated with the card. And this goes to prove control, that the user, in fact, is the owner of the card because they know the PIN. At higher assurance levels, this is also augmented usually with a biometric. So the user will be asked for a fingerprint that's then compared to something either on the card or that is stored by the issuer, the card issuer itself. Once all of this has been satisfied, essentially we now know that the person who is trying to get a derived credential is entitled and is, has been identity proofed. They already have a PIV card. So now the system will issue a derived PIV credential from a federal bridge certification authority. At the very least, it'll be issuing a derived PIV authentication certificate. And for those who are familiar with PIV, and I neglected to say CAC cards as well are similar. PIV is typically civilian, CAC is the Common Access Card or equivalent roughly Department of Defense. Those cards have multiple certificates. They have an authentication certificate, a signing certificate, and one or more email encryption certificates. And so the derived system will also issue at least an authentication system certificate, but very likely a signing and multiple encryption certificates as well. Now, finally, after issuing those, the system will link the two credentials, the derived PIV credential that's stored on the mobile and the underlying PIV that was used as the basis for issuance, and it'll monitor for updates. So if the user departs the government or for whatever the reason is no longer entitled to hold a PIV card, the system will automatically revoke those mobile derived PIV credentials as well. Next slide, please. So a couple of challenges to note here. The first thing is the FIPS, the 800-157 standard has only been around since 2014. So it hasn't yet fully been, I guess, read and absorbed across government and have a consistent understanding. In a lot of agencies that I speak to, there's still some questions about really what it means to have a derived credential, what the administrative linkages are, what the requirements are for ongoing checking against the original PIV card. Likewise, when it comes to signing and encryption certificates, the standard is a little bit light. The guidance that's out there focuses primarily on the derived authentication certificate and really has limited discussion around the signing and recovered encryption certificates. Again, leading to questions and a little bit of confusion in various parts of government. However, the biggest challenge ultimately is around consistent usage. As a CIO, there's really not an easy way to just deploy once and make these credentials available to all enterprise apps. And the reason for this really comes down to the security design of iOS and of Android, your iPhones and your Android devices. Some of the security designs that were really necessary to protect information from potentially malicious applications on the phone also limits access to these credentials. So as a CIO, it's hard to deploy once and make them available. If you're an ISV or a third-party software development, it means that it's difficult and really no standard way to find the PKI credentials, these mobile-derived credentials. And even if you do have access to them, then as a developer, you've got to code for PKI operations yourself. So you have to write the software to do encryption and decryption. Not necessarily something that that's in your wheelhouse, and maybe would be better left to somebody else. So to really move this ecosystem forward, there's really a strong need for a standard PKI services layer. Something that exists today on Windows devices, but does not actually exist in iOS and Android. Next slide, please. Okay, and so the final slide, the final thing I want to leave you with is that PIV, for those who have followed it at all, when FIPS 201 was put out, it was meant really to serve dual purposes. One is for the federal government with the personal identity verification process for employees, but it also meant to serve for high assurance corporate environments, to use a lot of the same techniques that governments use and to benefit from the work that government has done in really standardizing identity proofing to credential issuance. Derived PIV is really the same thing. It should be seen as a model that could be used really well beyond government. Corporate is a primary example for this, potentially beyond as well. In a corporate environment, the consideration really ought to be looking at doing derived credentials where you're tying the mobile identities to the corporate identity proofing that you've already done. When employees come in, they provide I-9s, driver's licenses, passports, etc. So you're already doing identity proofing. If you deployed a derived system, you then tie now any mobile identities to the underlying identity proofing that was done when an employee comes. And it allows for a clear path of revocation of all mobile credentials once an employee separates. And so the final thing that I want to just leave out there for the entire community, both those who are developing solutions as well as those who are looking to adopt stronger mobile identity solutions. You've heard a lot about mobile driver's licenses today. I've obviously talked about derived PIV credentials. There's a number of other use cases where there's a need to strongly proof identities for mobile credentials. It would be good, and I guess the question is there a way to eliminate some of the overlap, some way to take advantage of the strong identity proofing that are being done by organizations like the DMVs that really have a business to do that, but find a good way to be able to continue to use those credentials in other situations. And with that, I will pass control back. Thank you.
Great, thank you, David, and thank you, presenters. If we can go to the next slide, please. So we have time for a couple of questions, and let me start with the first one for Tom. Since you led this webinar off, how can other people and organizations participate in this discussion about the identity landscape?
Wonderful, thank you for asking. We've established and taken an approach of collaboration. We are encouraging people to participate. As we're walking through, our approach has been to have very simple framing of the use case and some key issues. As we walk through, we're looking to compare, contrast approaches, understand where there's some levels of consistency, some in some cases, legislative or preference choices around what can be shared or what can be architected. Everyone is welcome. Please feel free to send me an email, and then this way we can at least connect and have a discussion on how you might want to participate. Again, I would encourage some of the committee members, for example, the Payment Council, the Mobile Council, we would very much encourage your participation. And what we would love to be able to do is to foster some of the coordination between council and council efforts back over with some of the key stakeholders like AAMVA and AAMVA's efforts to see if we can, again, help the success of all of the efforts to better provide an enhanced user experience and stabilize and expand the marketplace and the transactions that we do. So again, please reach out. Again, the council, other associations, we'd be very interested in talking and going forward in collaboration. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Tom. Next question is for Suraj. How do you deal with different mobile operating system platforms and the constant change in mobile hardware for interoperability purposes?
Thank you, Randy. This is where the standardization and working, all the different players working together will help. There should be some kind of alignment towards offering a standard way of approaching the secure provisioning, as well as the verification of the credential that is stored on the phone. I believe that, the standardization is the first step. And after that, it will be up to the industry players to define themselves on their know-how on the digital security and the capability of delivering solutions on those platforms.
Great, thank you, Suraj. This next question is open, whoever can answer it. Are mobile driver's licenses Real ID compliant? And are there any examples where this has been implemented?
Randy, this is Geoff. Really, the people that are going to ultimately have to answer that particular question are the folks at DHS that are in charge of the Real ID program and determining compliance. I can tell you that AAMVA enjoys a very good relationship with the people there, and it has been a topic of conversation. My opinion is that in time, there's an expectation that any state that is issuing a Real ID compliant physical card and opts to go ahead and start implementing an MDL, that they would be recognized for federal ID purposes, with the caveat being that DHS has to be the one to make that determination and have to also feel comfortable that the security that is built into the work that's being done with the MDLs is at a minimum at a commensurate level with what's currently done with the physical documents. I can tell you from conversations that we've had inside of the larger credential issuing community, made up of both authorities that issue the credentials and then the industry that support that, almost universally, the opinion is that we're going to be able to do things here with MDLs that we've not been able to do, with physical cards, and to really alleviate some of those pain points. I think Suraj threw out a statistic that at any given time there's like 400 variants with a T of legitimate driver license or non-driver ID cards that are in circulation, and that's just here in North America. It definitely makes it a tough task for the folks that have to interact with those cards and make decisions on whether or not they're legitimate just based on that, visual inspection. It's a little bit of a drawn-out answer, but I think that you will see in time that DHS will likely land on going ahead and accepting these for their purposes, but in the end, they're the ones that have to be the ones to say that.
Okay. Next question for David Coley. You mentioned the need for a PKI services layer for mobile. Can you elaborate a bit on this and how that might work?
Sure. The challenge right now, as I think I mentioned, was when these credentials are issued, usually they're issued to sort of a system key store, or they're issued to an MDM key store, and sort of by definition of the security environment, that automatically locks down what apps on the phone can see the credentials in any given location. And so one solution to this really is to actually have an app that handles the creation of the private keys and the storage, and really does PKI services for other apps on the device. So those other apps do not have to actually have access to the private key, and thus they don't have to know or code for authentication or encryption or decryption. They would simply pass a message via inter-process communications from one app to this app that stores the credential and ask it to do an authentication operation, a signing operation, or an encryption operation. And that's really making it much easier for the whole third-party ecosystem to leverage the credential, but not have to figure out how to get access to the sensitive data or do those operations themselves.
Great, thank you. I'll open this up as an open question, whoever wants to respond. So with physical driver's licenses, there are ways that you can verify the authenticity of the license by physical security measures. What security measures are proposed for mobile driver's licenses to ensure that they are authentic?
Sure, I can start, and I think Suraj knows as well and mentioned it. When you're exchanging this data, we have the ability in the computing systems to perform sort of cryptographic operations that would ensure the integrity of the data and display who the signer of that data is, so that the relying party would say, oh, I can see that, yes, this is exactly the data that was intended, and then to be placed in the MDL for this holder. And then as well, I think there's the option and add-on of being able to authenticate the user, so that you know that the user is the one who released that data to the relying party. So I think a lot in the cryptography here and in the trusted channels to the data is important for establishing that trust.
Yes, to add to David's answer, and the panelists, the people who are working on the standardization, they're moving towards something that is similar to what is used in electronic passports. Signing the data using a private key that is assigned to the issuer. So when a verifier, all they need is a root certificate that can be public, and the public key that is embedded within the certificate to verify whether the credential is genuine. And this is already established thanks to the electronic passport program, which already uses this kind of mechanism. So the ISO working group as well as the AAMVA working group, we are modeling it somehow in similar lines.
Great, thank you. And I'm sorry, that's all the time we have today for questions. I want to again thank Tom Lockwood, Geoff Slagle, David Kelts, Suraj, Sudhakaran, and Dave Coley for their presentation and support for this webinar. The webinar was recorded, and you will be receiving an email message with a link for the playback and also where you can download the presentation deck. And we encourage you to share that information with your friends and colleagues so that as many people as possible have the opportunity to hear this content. Also, you can visit the Secure Technology Alliance website at www.securetechalliance.org. And if you click under the Alliance Activities tab on the left corner under Industry Councils, you'll see the white paper resources as well as many other resources available for you. So thank you again for your attention today. Thank you, panelists, for your content, and we look forward to hearing and seeing from all of you in the very near future. Enjoy the rest of your day.